So tonight I'm very excited to welcome Sarah Chihaya. Bibliophobia is an alternately searing and darkly humorous story of breakdown and survival told through books. Delving into texts such as Anne of Green Gables' Possession, A Tale of the Time Being, The Last Samurai, Chihaya interrogates her cultural identity, her relationship with depression, and the intoxicating, sometimes painful ways books push back on those who love them. Sarah Chihaya is a book critic, essayist, and editor. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Review of Books, The Nation, New York Magazine, among other places, and she is the author of The Ferrante Letters, an experiment in collective criticism. She is currently a contributing editor at Los Angeles Reviews of Books. Chihaya will be in conversation with Edim, a literary tastemaker, entrepreneur, and advocate for diverse voices in literature. She's also our marketing director here at PNP. In 2015, she founded Go Red Black Girl, an online platform and book club dedicated to celebrating the works of Black women authors. Her latest book is Gather Me. Please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Sarah Chihaya and Edim.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here. Hello Sarah, how are you?
Hi Gloria, hi everyone. Thank you for coming out on a really miserable night. Yeah, it's nice to be here.
It's nice to be nice and warm and dry inside.
Yes.
To give everyone a little background, Sarah and I met earlier last year. We went to a conference together because both of our books deal with books. How we feel about them, how they shape our lives. And when I read your book, I felt like you were just a kindred sister. So many of the titles that like you fell in love with or shaped your ideas also shaped my ideas. And that's like the magical thing about books, you know, like no matter where you read them, there's like this universality that happens. And I absolutely loved your book, so congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, I felt the same. You know, both times I've read your book, I felt like we were really like our books are cousins or something. Like they grew up reading the same things, feeling lots of the same feelings, and so it's really wonderful. It was great last time we talked, and it was wonderful to be doing this again with you.
Yeah. So I want to pull the audience in, and I want to start with the title because it's so intriguing. It like really shapes how one thinks about books, like Bibliophobia. Can you tell us why you decided on that title and why you decided to write the book the way you did?
Sure. So Bibliophobia is an idea that I had a long time ago. It was originally it's an idea for a short story. When I was in grad school, I thought I'd write a short story I had a bunch of ideas for a lot of short stories about people in books, women in books, and their sort of weird relations. So, there was one about a woman who starts to only eat books, and how long she can sustain herself on that diet physically. And Bibliophobia was one of them. It was this idea of like being afraid. It started because I was living in California, and I was really afraid that there was going to be an earthquake, and my bookshelves would fall because they were very, very unstable. They would fall on my head and kill me. I think every author, has some version of that fear, whether it's literal or metaphorical, or of being killed by your books. I think a lot of readers feel that too. And so it started off as this kind of lighthearted thing, but then, so the book is both the book about books and the memoir of a time that I was hospitalized for depression, and it's a memoir sort of that period of mental illness and triumphant in my life, and it took the form of a kind of intense fear of books, of Bibliophobia, where I was literally unable to read for a while after the hospital and just couldn't make words make sense. And it was really scary just not to be able, and you can imagine just not being able to read when it was the thing that I had built my whole life around. As an academic and also just as a person, like books like you, for me, books are everything, you know, and so I couldn't imagine who I was without them. And so the fear is of books themselves and of the way that I had sort of lost touch with them.
Yeah. And as someone is reading your book, you really go down this path of like self-discovery, and you are absolutely vulnerable in terms of sharing like your heartbreak, your desires, the person you're trying to become, or even like find that person within the book. And I think sometimes the reader, there could be some dissonance. Like there's the person you want to be and the person you actually are. And like you can feel that tension within your writing. One of the like terms that you have is life ruiner, and it's like central to your memoir. You describe it as the book you can't ever recover from, that you never stop thinking about, that makes you desperate to reach that frightening depth of experience with other books. Can you just elaborate on that concept and, you know, you talk about the life ruiners in the novel that really like held you and made you want to talk to other people about these titles?
Yeah, sorry, frog in my throat. The life ruiner came to me very early in writing this book. I was thinking about what books did to me and why I felt like all I could write about were books in various different ways. And the life ruiner is, I mean, you can have a lot of them. Ideally, you have a lot of them, everyone, hopefully. There's these books that come along and they just find you at the right time or the wrong time.
Right.
And they find you when you're not ready for them sometimes. And there's sometimes books that just feel rhapsodic and wonderful. And some of the books that I write about in Bibliophobia are like that, like Hayasway's Possession. Like that's a book that I fell in love with, like head over heels the first time I wrote it. And every time I read it now, I still love it. So it can be sort of out of control love like that, or it can also be a kind of love that's scary. You know, I mean, like love for the persons that frightens you because you're not sure what to do with it, and you're not sure you're ready for it, and you're not sure it will always steer you in the right direction. And so I think the Bluest Eye for me is the book that I introduced the term life reader with. And it's the first one that I really remember because I read it, and you also wrote about in your book.
Yeah.
It like really was unlike anything that had ever happened to me before. It's an event, not a book.
It absolutely. I think like I don't want to say like Bluest Eye destroyed my innocence, but it made me so aware of like the good and the bad, and how you could be in the midst of something that's like beyond you.
Yeah.
Like it just exposed me to so many like new ideas that like I was part of it because I read it so young, like part of it is just like sheer confusion, but also just like this is the protagonist is me. Like I could be like center myself in this situation and be this person, and I can like empathize so deeply with this person. This hasn't happened to me, but I can see their yearnings, their heartbreaks, they're wanting for something that they can't have. And like, yeah, I didn't use that word ruin, so when I read it in your book, I was like, oh, like that's what was happening. It was like breaking down the idea of what I thought was reality.
Yeah, it makes you, I remember reading it and just thinking, when I grew up not far from Morrison, Ohio, so it was like very close geographically, physically, like very close. And it made me realize it also was not that far, like in time, you know, like it was the 90s. Like, I mean, it's a long time, but a short time. And it all of a sudden the characters felt so close in the period, it felt so close. And I remember wondering how other people in my class were receiving it.
Yeah.
It felt like the systems, I mean, as you say, the larger systems that were in play that I hadn't wanted to think about, you know, having to do with beauty and whiteness and institutionalized racism and the things I didn't want to look at that were shaping my life.
Right, but or maybe not even, we haven't had the lived experience yet. You know what I mean? So maybe that's young people, especially when you're like in middle school or going into high school, like you understand things are happening, but you haven't been fully touched by them just yet.
Right, they're happening maybe to someone else, or in history, or somewhere else.
Yeah, theoretically,
Right.
It's just like, this hasn't happened to me, but I know I'm close enough to it to touch it and to understand
It's
it.
very uncomfortable to realize that some version
Yeah.
Even it's very diluted is happening to you around you.
Yes. And then I remember just being really taken by, I always I was a very confident child, and then when I was aware that how other people could perceive me, and that like confidence dropping, you know what I mean? That like, oh, this is how people possibly are observing me, but I have no idea of that, you know? Can we talk about another book that we shared with Similar Love for?
Yes.
That like actually like gave us so much confidence, Little Women.
Oh yeah.
You know, just like
Yes. Little Women, it's so funny because I was just reading your section about Little Women and how you identified right with Jo March. As I think many aspiring writers do. You know, we want to be her. And I've always had this kind of problem with identification, which is something that I wrote about in the book, like this difficulty that I have with identifying with characters. And I remember with Jo, I wanted to be someone who could be like her, but I didn't feel like I was there yet. Like I think you were a more confident child, but I was not a very confident child. And so I remember thinking, like, I wish I had that kind of desire that Jo has to tell stories, and that need she has to write and to talk and to just be herself. But I felt kind of scared. And I remember being very afraid when I was little that I was Beth. I mean, well, I now feel differently about Beth and not, you know, to look down on Beth, but I was afraid that I was going to be that child who was like looking out behind everyone, you know, behind everyone or like through the shadows. But I wanted to reach out.
I think there's something about the March sisters. The other thing I really gravitated to was just like the sisterhood. Like I have both my siblings. I have 2 younger boys, some male siblings, and I just wanted sisters. And I just really wanted sisters.
One of the books one of the series that I remember reading when I was very little, like before any of the books in this book, like when I first learned how to read, were those We Follow Jonas books.
Yes,
I remember I wanted so desperately to have a twin. Like I wanted so badly to have someone to share everything with and to go through things with. And the Marsh sisters, I think, the way they support each other is so enviable.
Yeah.
And I also had an older brother, and he was quite a lot older, and so I was alone a lot in my childhood. And I just really wanted to be with people like that.
Yeah, I'm the oldest, and so that, you know, being the eldest daughter, that could be a whole other conversation, but, you know, and so I always wanted to just have less of that responsibility and just be in that fold. Yeah, there's so much we could talk about. I don't know if you're away from my questions too much, but I really want to go, you mentioned your tradition earlier, and I do want to talk about how books can be just a sanctuary when one is feeling amiss and trying to like find themselves again. Can you talk about that moment when you realized that reading itself felt like a burden, and how you gravitated to make that switch and find yourself again? In particular, the friends that supported you and offered different opportunities for you to just come back to yourself.
Sure. Thanks. I think that the idea of the book as a sanctuary is something that I come back to again and again. And sometimes it's a sanctuary when we need it, and sometimes we're looking for it and the doors closed. Yeah. And this is one of those moments when I had the doors closed, and they'd always been open before. I'd always been able to go to books to not be myself or to be somewhere else. And suddenly, when I had this kind of nervous breakdown and inability to read, I went to books, and they just weren't good for me for the first time ever. It was very scary, sort of as, you know, they were the thing that offered me like a home and an identity my whole life, and all of a sudden that was gone. And it was very scary to sort of realize how much I had been dependent on books and how much I've been depending on fiction physically as like a place to put my feelings or put various problems I have, whatever, in my life, but when all of a sudden that crush isn't there anymore, I had to rely on the people around me more. And I had always like prided myself on not relying very heavily on people, like taking care of myself and being independent and being, in many ways. But at this time I realized that like if I no longer had books to go to, I had to let my friends help me. And I was thinking, a lot about the part in Gather Me where you write about June Jordan and the Jordan quote about sanctuary and how the library is a sanctuary. And it really can be that like sacred space that you can seek sanctuary in the library, but when the doors of the church are closed, like what do you do? And I felt that it was kind of like loss of faith, like a kind of, I've been abandoned by God. Like I'm on the church steps and like the door is locked. Like what do I do?
Did you feel like that those moments were, was it an emotional disconnection or physically? Where did you feel in your body that like it was, you were untethered from reading and literature?
I felt it will physically, like, in my, sort of literally in my eyes, like I couldn't really, in my head, I couldn't make things make sense. I could see the words, I could read them, but I couldn't make them sort of go together. Like there was something, and I've not really experienced anything like that since, but I have been dealing with like more COVID-related like muscle issues, and it feels like that. Like you think that something's going to happen, it doesn't. You think you can use like your hands a certain way, you can't. So it was sort of, it felt like an essential part of my body had sort of gone, had stopped working. I think of reading as a kind of necessary function, like breathing or sleeping, and all of a sudden I couldn't do that anymore.
And that's why I was so curious about the physical aspect of it, because I think sometimes we intellectually know something and know how it's supposed to go, but then when you physically or emotionally can't reach that depth or respond in the way that intellectually you want to, it is a hard thing to reconcile, because it's like your mind knows that you're responding differently, and the way you write about it is just so beautifully done, because you offer the reader a glimpse of what you're experiencing and allow them to move through the process with you. And you were just about to talk about the reflection of friends and community and how they brought you back. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. I think I wouldn't have written this book, or I wouldn't have maybe gotten through this time and like gotten to the book without the like family of friends that I have in New York, who some of whom are writers and are critics, and have really helped me understand that I can have an identity that has to do with books, and I can be a writer, I can still read, but there are different ways to do it. And like part of that is seeing examples, seeing people who work with literature differently. I was an academic for many years. I was in grad school, but I was at Princeton for 10 years. And I just had this very one-track mind. Like I had this certain way that it had to go. Like I had to get tenure. I had to keep teaching. I had to stay at the university. And I had sort of lost track of the fact that there's so many different ways that books have supported me in my life. And so many different ways that I've interacted with books. And I kind of lost that in this sort of desire for stability through professionalization or some version of that. And so coming back to books has been a process that's still ongoing. I still have some trouble reading sometimes. But it's been this process of learning to read without expectations for myself and without needing to get something from a reading. Like without having to write about every book that I read or without having to get an article or like do something. to earn reading.
Yeah, like it's almost like that right now there's so much movement and conversation about this idea of just rest. Like you don't need to earn rest, you can just sit with it and like rest your body physically. And it's the same thing, you don't need to earn your reading, you know? Like you can read for enjoyment, you can read for your own personal intellect, but it's not something you earn, it's like part of it's part of your being, you know?
Yeah, and I think part of that is there's a kind of pressure to always enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like when I was a teacher, and I'm sure that like at the bookstore, like every bookstores always say this to me too, like book people,
Yeah.
and we all have like we live surrounded by books, and I feel like civilians sometimes are like, oh, isn't it wonderful? Like you must have a great time. Like your life must just be amazing because you just read all the time. And I remember when I was teaching, I was like, well, it's not that simple. Like it's your pleasure is like my work a lot of the time. Like, and the fact that it is work sort of took away some of that pleasure. It took away some of that being able to read irresponsibly, or to read just for the sake of reading, or just for myself. So I've been trying to like regain that, kind of in a way like childlike wonder.
Absolutely. I feel the same way too, because so many of the things that how I engage with reading is in order to facilitate and share with other people, and serve as almost like a midwife sometimes with conversations or moderating. And I had to go back to it by like pulling myself into genres that I typically wouldn't read. So my go-to usually is contemporary literature. Or creative nonfiction. I love essays as well. And so I would read mysteries, or I'd read like more romance and try to find myself like in a space that wasn't my like default. And so I could or even reading something that had more rigor that I would just have to like process in a different way, like use my my mind in a different way. But it's like your relationship is reading, you have to be so intentional about it. And then the other part about it is being in conversation with other people. Like I find when I'm just like at a bar or at a coffee shop and I see a good book, like, oh, look, what do you think about that? I recently was at a coffee shop and I like tapped someone. I was like, what do you think about this book? I was so excited. And the person was like, I don't like it. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, so tell me like why you don't like it. And it was a pleasant conversation, but just even talking to people about the things you're reading too are so wonderful. And so it doesn't just like live in your head and stay stagnant. It can be like it can just blossom in a different way.
Yeah, I feel that weird caution of interaction very strongly. I will not name the book, but I was reading a book that everyone had read, and it was sitting on my table at the coffee shop, and I had not liked the book, but someone came up to it. This woman came up, and she clearly felt seen. No, she was like, I want to talk to you about this book. And she just looked so crestfallen when I think I didn't respond with enough enthusiasm. It was like, well, I tried to be like, well, I liked it. But I didn't like muster up.
It was too late. Yeah. It was okay. I was just kind of like, oh, okay. But I still wanted to talk to her about it though, because I was like, okay, so like, why? I think that is like the best thing about reading and literature. It's like your why. Like, what compels you to read it? What are you drawn to? What like character made you like cry or laugh? Like those are the things that really make reading enjoyable. Just like your physical and emotional response to the thing you're reading or how you're taking it in. And that's another part of just like the witnessing of you reading the things that either were like your life ruiners or the things that were like your salvations. It is like a beautiful thing to witness someone experiencing that like firsthand.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's one of the things I really wanted to come through in the book. I wanted to get, first of all, everyone to think about like how they read. It's primarily like through these scenes of reading to enact that for themselves. Like this may be a list of books that were very important to me and like, ruined my life in great terrible ways, but also the main point of this book, I think that I want everyone to come away with is like, what are my books that did that to me, and like what can I go back and revisit, and like how will it be different this time?
Yeah.
but I love your point about conversation. Because I think, you know, when I was reading the anime this time, I know I keep reading your book because I love it so much. I love it so much. But it reminded me of something that I thought about a lot as a scholar, and that was one of the focuses of my work was the need for conversation. And my first book about Ellen Ferrante was co-written with 3 other critics. And it's a sort of an unconventional academic book because it's written together and it's written through letters that we wrote to each other about Ferrante. And it's the kind of work that a lot of people don't value sufficiently in the academy, that goes on all the time, at conferences, at talks, at the bar, whatever. But it's not formalized very often. That's the real joy. The joy is the work that happens in the classroom or with your colleagues or with your just friends in the profession. Some of what we wanted to do with that book was to say this, we're all doing this. Yeah. We're all doing this, but not admitting it at the time. Academics or writers in general just feel like they have to stake out this territory, this is what I write about, this is my idea. But actually, sharing ideas is the most joyful thing, the best thing. And your book was so much about conversation, I think, this time. Yeah. And the need, when you say you want to have a relationship that brings words back into your life. Yeah. And the sort of wanting, in the beginning, in the very, very beginning, you say something I love talking, but I know who to talk to. Yeah. And that's when you started the book club. That's perfect. That's so much I think that there are lots of times in our lives for reading alone, but more and more, reading is something that I want to do with other people. Yeah. I want to do it to understand other people. I want to see what other people think. I want to hear what they think.
Yeah, part of, as I was writing my book, I was able to refer to a lot of my journals, and I had a lot of the original books that I had read in high school and college, and I could read in the margins the notes I took, how I annotated things, and I was just so surprised at the person I was, and the things that I underlined, and the things that felt unfamiliar to me. I was this isn't even the person I am anymore, but I also have a lot of compassion for that younger person too. So there's so much about, it's I feel like books hold so many memories. It's similar to when you hear your favorite song, and you're just this is my karaoke song, this is what I go to. The same thing with a book that you have a quote in, this is the quote that made me feel seen or feel something. And I feel like we talked about this a little bit. My favorite thing is when you see a work of art and you get that or you hear a really good song, you get that tickle. You know what I mean? You get it's almost you get goosebumps or get chills. It's just that is the best feeling. I feel I'm I don't have many vices. That's about it. It's that feeling of reading something or hearing something.
It's gonna be with you.
It's gonna be with you. It's that creativity is touching something deep within me that I physically had a reaction to it. And the same thing with, in my book I talk about my mother's mental illness, and I was always searching, I was so curious on what was happening in her mind, so when you talk about your depression and the things that you experienced, it gave me some insight on just what she might have been feeling or experiencing that I couldn't fathom. And that is the exchange that happens with reading. Sometimes you read someone's story and you have a better understanding, or you have more compassion, or you just have more curiosity to dig deeper. And I just love that. I love that we both can read each other's stories and see each other and so clearly and have so much empathy for one another.
Yeah, thank you for saying that about depression, but your mom's, a lot of what I wanted to accomplish, especially towards the end of this book, as I was finishing it and revising it, I was thinking, who do I want to read it? I don't know, there were various different audiences that I had in mind. There were sad Asian girls who listen to too much Mitski, and grad students who are depressed about what direction their lives are taking, and writers who think their bookshelves are going to kill them. There are all these people, but the biggest audience that I wanted to really speak to is people who had been through depression, like either themselves or people they loved, and just not really had a lot of chances to see that was like a very normal thing. And I think it's been really interesting seeing the reactions to this book, because a lot of them have been like, this book is so sad. And I just want to feel like, I don't think it's that sad. I think there are sad things that happen in it, but like, I'm obviously still here, like, it's fine, like, you're okay. It's just, depression is a thing that like any other chronic illness, it's like something that we live with.
Yeah.
And I want to just show people that it's something that more of us live with than we like to think or like to admit. It's something that can happen to children that we don't talk about very much.
Yeah.
Like we don't like to talk about sad kids. Understandable, but also like,
It's a reality.
yeah, lots of kids with that.
And that's what I felt too. Like I think it's like your personal experience, because as I read it as hopeful. Like it just felt
Good, yeah.
I felt like it felt very clear, very honest, very transparent, very hopeful. Like this is the reality that so many people experience and have just like true feelings, you know? It's just, and not everything is going to be like sunshine and rainbows, but not everything is dark clouds either. It's just like the reality of just how one experiences life and art and reading. So I found it, but I don't know if that's only because of the experiences I've done that too. Like I've gone a lot. Like you went through a lot.
You did go through a lot, but it is hopeful.
Yeah,
and
it's
then
like,
the way your book ends with a letter to your son that's like so optimistic and so has so much hope invested in.
It's like when you have the thing is like when you are living your life. Like I don't know. I just thought it was my life. I didn't think of it as a good or bad or like this is really hard. It just was like it is my life and this is how I'm gonna move forward.
This is what's happening.
This is what's happening. And so it was really interesting to get the feedback, especially from my editors and like sharing all the things that were like they're like, but you're so like, optimistic. And I'm like, yes, I am. Like, you can, both things can happen, both things can exist at the same time. And, it's just like, I think for both of us in our stories, it shows like the duality of what your story can be and how you can shape it with books and other forms of art that inspire you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're all capable of having more than one feeling.
Exactly. We're multifaceted.
I think that one of the reasons that I feel like these books are our cousins, or they're kindred spirits, to use sort of Anne Green Gables language, is that they aren't just sunshine and rainbows. So many bibliomemoirs are like, I hate that word, but that's the word, please. So many books about books are like, especially now, like, given various things.
Oh, yeah.
Like people want to believe the books can offer all the solutions, and if you just read more, like, everyone will be better, and everything will be great. And sometimes books can make us feel better, and sometimes that's what we need, and that's what we're looking for. And sometimes we need books to kind of make us feel worse, to, as we were saying earlier, to make us look at the hard things, to make us understand the things that we didn't want to understand.
To make us question things.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I do appreciate the moments where I read something and it makes me deeply uncomfortable, and I have to investigate why that is.
Yeah.
Because it's like you have to, like, what is tugging at your heart? Like, why do you feel, if you read something that you don't agree with, like, all those things made me go deeper. I've been working on really trying to explore when I feel agitated by something. I'm like, why am I agitated by this? Like, is it me? Am I projecting onto something? But that's been something, given the political landscape and everything that's happening in the world, I feel like myself having like a shorter and shorter fuse, because I feel like I'm getting explored. I'm like, what is it that, do I want change? Do I need to act on something? Do I need to connect with more people? What is like shortening my fuse? But I imagine a lot of people are experiencing that right now because of everything that's happening in the world, It's just like different ways to express our frustrations.
Yeah, I mean, self-confrontation like that is like very difficult. It's very uncomfortable. but sometimes it's like the most necessary thing, you know, like to ask ourselves, why don't I like sitting with this thing? Like, why is this making me afraid? Why is it making me angry? I mean, that's like the biggest thing. Like, why is it? I used to have quite a bad temper when I was younger, and you know, I read about how my dad had like a very bad temper in the book, and the question of why is something making you angry is one that I thought about a lot when I was younger, and I thought about in this book. And it's one that I think about less because I'm less angry now. But I think it's valuable, right? To, instead of giving into it or instead of trying to repress it, like,
It's explore it.
yeah.
And so when I think about anger, I'm always, I love the Audre Lorde quote when she says your anger is connected to your desire. It's like the things that you want to change. So even like if you feel envious or something or jealous, it's like explore that feeling. What do you want that others have that you feel like you're lacking, you know? But most people, as you mentioned, want to repress that or go away from it. Or sometimes, you know, because of our schedules and our day-to-day lives, you don't even have time to truly explore it and sit with it because you have to go to your 9 to 5 and then pick up the kids from daycare, et cetera, et cetera. But just giving your time, I don't know, just more valuable space to explore what you're feeling and the why behind them. And I think to go back to your book, you do that in a beautiful way. The example you gave with your father, the experiences you had throughout your childhood, the things you read that just gave you pause and allowed you to go deeper within yourself. Yeah, and I do want to give space for audience questions as well. If you want to share your life ruiner, if you have a question for Sarah, please pop up your hand and we'll make that available.
I would love to hear everyone's life runners.
Yes. While people are like gathering, thinking their questions, I do want to ask you one more question around the way like you intertwine personal narrative and literary analysis. How much of your quote unquote, you know, your critique brain came into the process? Like, were you able to write this like completely without critiquing it? You know what I mean? Like, were you able to kind of like pause your editor as you were writing this? And what was like the craft process like?
I can never pause my editor, like ever. I think part of that is so I didn't realize how much of this book came out of teaching until I had this event with Alec Bitumen last week, and I just had this sudden, maybe it was like seeing some of my students in the audience, I was like, wait, there's a reason this is like it is. It's because I've been rehearsing for it in the classroom the last like 15 years. I think that it started off being a little too analytical and too academic. And actually, at first I thought this would be a university press book, an academic book that was mainly about criticism and would be on the personal side of the scholarly book. But instead I ended up with a book that was on the scholarly side of a personal book. And I think that it was just the process of letting my editor is still always on, but I have to let go of some of that kind of tendency to intellectualize all the time and let myself write through the parts that were hard and let my actual editor at Random House push me to do that, because that's what when I met her is that I don't want to write a memoir. I want to write a book of essays. I want to write, a work of criticism. And she was the one who was like, well, it should go more towards the personal, and you can just challenge yourself to write that in equal measure. So hopefully what has resulted is, I always say there's two ways you can read it. You can read it as a memoir or as a work of criticism. I'd like to think that it's kind of 50-50. But it was a long process, and getting there, just whittling away the criticism to get it down from 80-20 to 50-50.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do we have, we have a question up there? She'll bring the mic over to you.
Sorry. You talked a little bit about how reading became work and how the pleasure of reading sort of dissipated a little bit. Can you talk about the reverse of that? Like how you made the decision to make reading your life's work, and did that happen in relation to any of the books that you discuss?
It happened very precisely in relation to Possession, which is a book about, it's a book in some ways about how unhappy academics are, and I was like, I'm gonna do that thing. I'll go to grad school now. It's a book, on one hand, it's a book about the futility of academic pursuit, but on the other, it's about how irresistible it is, and how irresistible it is to keep reading and keep looking through literature, and living through literature, and like really loving words. And that's the first book that certainly it's the first time I've ever thought about going to grad school. I didn't even know what that was. This morning my family had gone, and it never occurred to me really as a path that I was sort of unwittingly going down by reading all these books. But then when I read by it, I remember thinking, I'm enjoying this in a way that I don't think everyone enjoys books, and so maybe I should pursue that. But I think that I went into academia, I went into that sort of version of the life of letters because it was the only sort of professional way that I could think of doing it at the time. And now that I'm in a different moment in life and I'm writing more different things and like thinking about literature a little bit differently after this experience, I'm at another sort of fork in the road of being like, well, what do I do with books? What do I do with books now? Like, how do I deal with literature moving forward? It's still very much a work in progress.
So I'm wondering, because you're talking about how your relationship with reading has changed a lot, especially since you were breakdown, but what about relationship with like writing? Did you ever feel like during your experience in the hospital, were you thinking like, oh, this is an experience I'm going to write about? Did you have motivation to write? Did it feel impossible? Like, what was that kind of like?
Good question. I remember thinking in the hospital, I sort of had a little laugh to myself in the hospital, because one laughed surprisingly a lot in the hospital. I was kind of finding myself there, and I was like, now I'm like a sort of mid-century female author, like they all went to the loony bin, as Kate Milne calls it in her book. And so I remember thinking like, this is an interesting thing, and maybe I will write like a mental health memoir in the vein of Girl Interrupted or Preservation or whatever, but it was sort of, I think because it seemed impossible to me at the time, it was possible to make a joke out of it, like, well, this has sort of proved my bona fides as a writer because I'm like crazy. But it was just a way of sort of thinking around it, and like, I wasn't thinking seriously about actually writing. Like, in fact, I was kind of at a moment in my life where I thought I might never write again. But at the same time, I was like making these jokes, like maybe I'll write a book about it.
This is the thing, because I feel like I have a very strong sense of humor, but I feel like the more things that you experience that are like hardships, quote unquote, you can laugh at it. I laugh at so many things that people will be like, that is absurd. And so I find that like amazing. Like, that is very funny. I would also make that joke if I was like admitted, like, here I am, because it's like, what else can you do but like, again, laugh at it and like embrace your reality.
Exactly, I think that's so true. And I think that, like, to me, there's no greater crime in a piece of literature or film or anything than humorlessness. Like, I think that, like, the more humorless something is, the more I'm like, this thing takes itself too seriously.
Yeah,
like, life's not like that.
Exactly. Life is just like, has way more nuance, and just like, things can still be funny,
Yeah, definitely.
Does anyone else have another question? Don't be shy, or share your life ruiner.
I was lucky enough to be a former student of yours about that, but I guess there's a sort of there's a background conversation going on in the memoir about what's at stake here with the state of the academy vis-a-vis popular fiction, vis-a-vis popular criticism, vis-a-vis like normal writing for people who just are civilians, as you call them. I guess, do you have any thoughts, especially after finishing the memoir, of what the state of that relationship is? Especially given, I mean, you were my favorite professor, a lot of my classmates' favorite professor, but the academy wasn't seemingly right for you. I guess, do you have any additional thoughts?
That is a great question. It's a hard question also. It's a question that we could have a whole other conversation about.
A whole other book.
Yes. And in fact, there are many books about the state of the university and like how sustainable it is and what room there is for creative criticism and like, as you say, there is a background conversation in the memoir that I wasn't sure at times how to write about or how much to write about the university not valuing certain kinds of work and like especially creative work unless you're in the creative writing department or a creative writer, as though they're uncreative writers, which is whatever. There's this sort of question of how much the work you do counts, like how much any work counted in the academy, and it didn't count enough. And it's that for a long time was occasion of much soul searching for me. So it's like, well, because I want to write this kind of work that is not entirely scholarly as we know it, like, does that mean that I'm not a critic anymore? Does that mean that I'm not a scholar? Does it mean I'm not smart enough? Does it mean that I, because I want to write for people, like for all of you, does that mean that I no longer want to write for my colleagues? Like, and I don't think that you should have to make that choice. And I think that increasingly there are departments that are beginning to be like, wait, lots of our professors want to do creative work. What does that mean? And are reevaluating what those standards are. In fact, the MLA like just did this big study or reevaluation saying like they're going to count creative critical work in a certain way and make it more of a real thing. But I think that I am just personally sort of glad to be out of that setting. It's funny because I missed teaching a lot. I loved teaching so much. It was really like the thing that, at the worst parts of this book, that like got me up and like just made me keep going. Because I wanted to see my students, I wanted to talk to people, I wanted to have that conversation. But at the same time, I'm really glad to be out of the university, for now at least. Because I think that there are so many different standards that it either, sometimes it imposes on you and sometimes it doesn't even impose them, it just suggests that you might write this kind of book. And I think that I took those standards too seriously. It was like very hard to draw the line between what the university wanted from me and what I wanted from literature myself. I think that's an ongoing question for departments, for people individually, for students, for teachers, for everyone, to be asking like, what do we expect from our education? What do we demand from them? Like, do we expect them only to be like cut and dry and very academic, or do we also want them to address some of these things that we've been talking about? The passions that you have for reading and the feelings that reading brings up.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Do we have any more questions? I have one last question to close this out. I really just want to reflect on your journey, and I'm going to give another quote. You write, "I am trying now to let life happen as it happens and to move through the world without constructing a predetermined narrative to cling to." And that quote really resonated with me because that's how I close my memoir as well. It's just thinking how I could be more present, more aware of my surroundings and not always falling into a book to capture how I was feeling. Can you talk about just your current relationships to reading? And it feels like that really goes with the conversation you just, the question you just answered in terms of academically, like your creative pursuits right now. What is inspiring you? What is motivating you to write? What are you reading? I'm really curious to hear what's on your nightstand as you reflect back on this journey to who is your reader that you mentioned earlier? Is it that same reader, or are you thinking of different ways that people will engage with your work?
Yeah, thank you. That sort of, I think this is why people think their books are sad, because they're like, uncertainty is scary. But actually uncertainty is a wonderful thing. Like, it's really freeing to be like, I don't have to be anything. I don't have to read a certain way. I don't have to write a certain way. And
I'm really
anything that I'm trying to open myself up to the fact that any kind of writing that I do, it may not go anywhere. It may not be writing that my editor or my agent are interested in. May not be writing that I finish, but like any writing or any reading that I do is helping me get somewhere. It may not be an end in itself, but it's helping me along the way.
It's like food, it's like nourishment.
Yeah.
You always have to eat, you always have to be stronger. Yeah.
And like someday I'll get to another thing that you need that nourishment and you need that, So I'm trying to, I think I say in the book, to read without expectations and just go back to a kind of like truly curious reading, like a reading that is not, some of the reading that I do, I still do kind of professionally for like music or whatever, but I'm trying in my free time I'm trying to have more like free time where I'm no longer thinking about work. But I'm also trying to just read and like regain that sense that I am just interested in a thing. I want to pursue it because I'm just interested in it. So I've been very slowly reading this biography of Alexander von Humboldt, the German 18th century explorer, because my boyfriend really loves it, and actually Tori Pierce recommended it to me. She's an incredible reader, just amazing mind. And I thought, she told me that she'd read that book, and I was like, wow, I wish I could read like that. I wish that I was like interested in things enough to just read them. And so I was like, I'll read that book. And it is like, it's a different kind of book. Like I don't read a lot of popular history. I don't read a lot of biography. I don't read a lot of books like that. And so it's like an interesting challenge just to read something else. And just be like, other people do this in other ways. Like not everyone reads like me.
I love that. It's like reading, for me, I don't tend to read there's like the new category, the National Book Awards, which is like science. And so I was like looking through all the categories. I was like, I'm gonna pick one of these and just like read this. That's not usually what I gravitate to, but it's like the same thing. It's just like, oh, let me be curious about that. I also recently read a book like all about sharks because my son's like really into sharks. I was like, I'm gonna read this. I'm like, why not? This is like your homework. It's like you make people
have questions about sharks someday.
It also makes for great trivia. Like imagine if you're in a bar and like you're like the one person who does that fact in that book. So yeah. And the second part of that question was, is your reader the person that you envision reading the book? Is it still the same person, or are you thinking of other ways that people may engage with the book?
I think that I would like to think that there are readers that I didn't imagine for the book. Like, I think that I had, speaking of predetermined narratives, like I outlined all those kinds of readers that I imagined, like I thought I was writing for them. But I'd like to think that there are readers that I never thought, people who come from different genre backgrounds and find this, and they're like, I don't really care about like most of the books you're writing about or you read, but I do read this way. Like I do read in this way that feels resonant with the way that you read. I think that through like everyone, ideally, whatever readers do come to it, I want them to just look through it at themselves. You know, I don't want them to. I almost did. That's actually why a memoir's finished up sit down. I was very embarrassed writing a memoir for a long time. I mean, I didn't want to write a book where people were just looking at me.
Yeah.
I wanted them to be able to see themselves through it, even if it had nothing to do, you know, with me or with academia or with any of the books that I was writing about. I want them to be able to see something in it about their own reading or ask themselves why they read.
Yeah.
So I think that my new ideal reader is one that I've never thought of before.
That's beautiful. I think you have achieved that and more. I think so many people are going to be just amazed by your writing, the way that you share your story with such vulnerability is very inspiring. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you for coming to TV.
Thank you,
You can give a round of applause.